Had never met him. His name was Steve Hardy. And Steve walks in my office and he said, I want to buy this radio station. And I said, well, how do you even know this radio station is for sale? And he said, you don't understand. He said, I was the DJ. I spun the first record ever on this frequency.
Oh, my gosh.
I want to buy the station. And I said, and I'm sitting there in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, dude, you have no idea how much I want to sell you this station. And so,
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
Want to welcome Ron Stone, the CEO and president of the Adams Radio Group, to our podcast. And this is honestly the first time, given the conditions that we're in, living under COVID-19 and the coronavirus pandemic, that I actually don't have the guest in studio with me. Ron is joining us from outside of Minneapolis, where Adams, the headquarters of the Adams Radio Group, is based. And welcome, Ron. Can you hear us okay?
Thank you. Yeah, I can hear you just fine. And I wish I was in the studio there because it's about 35 degrees here today and we're getting sleet outside. So it's still winter in Minnesota.
I can see it. It looks like you're in your living room and I see a beautiful fire burning in the background there.
I'm actually, this is my basement office. So my wife basically gave me the whole basement. And it's always been my office down here and study, but I've never really used it for a business office. Always just been my private office, and but now it's my work office. This is where I'm working from. As we're all,
most of us are working from home. That looks like a beautiful place to work from home. Short of the cold weather, but you've got the fire to keep you warm. So.
Yep.
A little bit of background on Ron. I mean, what an impressive career. 35-year radio veteran. He's had, and we're going to go into your career, and I'm going to ask you kind of chronologically, so I'm excited to talk about that, but has risen throughout the ranks and now oversees all of Adams. They've got stations in 5 markets, a total of 25 stations, based in New Mexico, Indiana, Florida, and Maryland. Ron started, and this is, I want to kind of dive into this. How did you, it appears in your youth, you weren't really interested in radio because you started off doing accounting, and that's what you studied at East Carolina University, correct?
Yeah, no, it was an interesting path for me to get into the radio business. You know, so many people, when you hear their story, they say, oh yeah, when I was 8 years old, I built my first radio and had my first studio in the basement. That wasn't me. I went to college at East Carolina University in North Carolina, and originally had planned on getting my degree in history and then going on to law school, and ended up taking an accounting course as an elective, and it was easy. If it just came easy to me. And so I thought, well, I'll get an accounting degree and then I'll go into corporate law. So law was still part of the plan. But I got married while I was in college, and I had 2 children while I was still in college. And so by the time I finished my accounting degree, it was no longer was law school not even a thought. It was, I got to get a job. And so I started out. I had worked my last 2 years in college with a local public accounting firm, which was a big benefit to me while I was in school. And then I went to work for McGladrey and Pullen, CPA firm, when I graduated. And so I was doing public accounting, didn't really fall in love with it. They threw me into auditing, which I really disliked. And so I ended up getting an opportunity to go to work for Beasley Broadcasting as their controller. And I took that job, and that's where I fell in love with radio, was at Beasley.
And important, I wanted to bring up, because you mentioned your wife and 2 kids, and you married your high school sweetheart, Kim. And are still married today, which
we are.
Congratulations. And you guys have 3 kids and 5 grandchildren now.
We do. We will celebrate, not this year, but next year, we will celebrate 40 years of marriage. And we dated 3 years prior to that, but we've been together a long time.
That's amazing. Yeah. So when you answered, you were at the accounting firm at McGladrey and Pullen, and then Beasley, did you just answer an ad? They were looking for a controller?
You know, I was really not liking the auditing. If honestly, if they would have put me in taxation or in some other area of public accounting, I might have probably taken that as a career path, but auditing was just boring. And so I was looking for something different. And a lady that I knew was doing a job search for Beasley, and she put us together. And I actually turned the job down initially.
Oh, wow.
I was a little uncertain about it. And the controller that was there at the time called me up after I turned it down. And he said, listen, I just want to have a conversation off the record. He said, if you don't take this position in 6 months, you're going to really regret the decision. And he said, I can't tell you why, but you're going to regret it. And so I thought about it, and I thought, well, worst case is if I take the job and I don't like it, I can always get another job in public accounting.
Sure.
And so I took it, and sure to his word, about 3 months after I took the job, he resigned.
Oh, wow.
And so he was trying to hire someone that could step into his shoes. And that was his point. And so it worked out great for me. And I George was a great teacher. I enjoyed working for him. It was a good company, still is a good company. But the thing that I liked about working for that company was as a controller of it and the financial side, it was a time where the world was just becoming computerized.
Okay.
And so everything at the stations was manual when I got there. All the accounting was manual. The traffic at the stations was manual. George owned 19 separate companies, and each one had to be accounted for individually.
Oh, my gosh. Were you working out of their Florida offices?
Goldsboro, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
It was before they relocated to Florida. But through that experience, I was able to, I computerized the whole company, got traffic computerized in all the stations and computerized corporate. And as I went out to the radio stations, though, it was a great opportunity to just shadow people, whether it was a salesperson or an on-air person or the GM, didn't matter to me, as long as I could just be around people and learn the business. And George was an inspiration because he didn't start out in broadcasting. He was a teacher. And
I didn't know that. Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, he was a teacher. And so, it was clear to me that, you could have a career path in the business, even though you weren't necessarily coming up through the on-air side. And so I fell in love with it. And, I never looked back. I mean, it's been radio ever since.
So that was, a pretty big gig. You're still very young, and you get hired.
I was 23.
Unbelievable. And now you're the controller.
I was 23.
And you're not only the controller for a market, but you're the controller for all of Beasley Broadcasting.
Yep. It was a big job at a young age. And I tell you, I'll never forget, this is one of the funniest stories ever for me. I'll never forget when the controller did resign, because when I was originally hired, it was as general accountant working directly for this controller. And when he resigned, by then I had already fallen in love with the business.
Okay.
Believe it or not, in 3 months, I already knew this was it. And so now my big fear became, George is going to hire somebody twice my age to come in and be this controller, and I'll be stuck underneath this person, and I won't be able to grow, and it won't turn out like I had hoped. And so I remember going to George and proposing to him to give me a shot at the job. And because at that time, their financial statements, they were 6 months behind on everything. It was so backed up.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, look, just give me 30 days to prove to you that I can do the job. And I said, worst case is it's 30 days, you don't have to pay somebody else. And so he gave me that opportunity, and we got everything current, and everybody worked really hard in the office to help me do what needed to be done. And we got everything current. And in 30 days to the day, I walked into his office with a big binder of current financial statements on every single market. And so at that point, we were able to negotiate, me becoming the controller. And I think I'll never forget these words George said. I went in there to him and I made a proposal to him for me to take that job at twice the pay I was making as a general accountant.
Uh-huh.
And George, I'll never forget his face. He's reading this letter I put together, and he looks up at me and he said, boy, when you go for it, you really go for the gusto. And I said, well, there's really no other way. And so we both kind of chuckled and laughed. But a couple of days later, he walked into my office and he said, I'm going to give you what you want. You're doing a great job, and thank you. And, we had a great relationship all the way through. So Still do.
I mean, that's a remarkable story on many levels, but one, George taking that kind of chance on you shows what a risk taker he was and the belief he had to have. And the second part is the chutzpah that you had to go at your age with very little broadcast experience and say, hey, I can do that. Where did you summon that courage?
I think part of it for me was just the fact that I was married and I had 2 kids, and I knew I had to build a future for my family. And so, making more money was a big deal for me. And that was part of it. But also part of it was, because of the experience I'd had during college, working for a CPA firm, being exposed to all of the accounting side, the financial side of things, gave me the confidence that I knew I could do the job. There was never a question in my mind that I could do the job. And so that was the easy part. Probably the hardest part for me was, I was a little nervous. I had never in my life asked somebody, for a raise, like what I was asking for, and so that part I was a little nervous about, but I also knew that I was, if anybody else coming in probably would have asked for even more. Somebody with 20 years experience would have wanted even more. So it was still a bargain for George.
Did he give you everything you asked for, or did he negotiate a little bit? He did. That's amazing.
He did. To his credit, he did. And it was a good relationship for both of us. I mean, I think, it paved the way for them. I've always looked at that company and thought, that in some small way I contributed to part of what they've accomplished, and it was a great time. I enjoyed it, enjoyed working for him, and enjoyed working with the people that were in that office. It was a great team of people.
It's an impressive company, and full disclosure, we do a fair amount of business with them, and Caroline and Heidi Raphael and Justin Chase and Buzz, who just recently left, but have been amazing to us as a company and very supportive. Yeah. And I'm also a big fan of everything they do for the community. I was invited last year. We went to Washington D.C. They accepted an award because of all the charitable work that they do, which I think is Beasley Cares, I believe, is the initiative.
Yeah.
Good company. So how long were you with Beasley?
So I was with Beasley for about 3.5 years. And then one of George's general managers who ran the Philadelphia station had an opportunity to buy some stations. And he had seven radio stations in 4 markets. This was back when you could still only own 1 AM and 1 FM in a market. But he bought these stations, and I was good friends with him. I had become good friends with him. And so he started his company and set up his corporate office down in Charleston, South Carolina, and offered me an opportunity to come down as his CFO. And so I saw that as an opportunity to continue growing. Sure. And plus, coming from Goldsboro, being from Goldsboro and working in Goldsboro still, it was a small town. And Charleston, compared to Goldsboro, was a big city. And so that was a little bit exciting too. And so I joined him and went down and was part of his company. And I stayed with him until about just a couple of weeks before Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston.
Okay.
And I had made the decision to leave there prior to that, before the storm hit. But we got out of there, and then I came back and worked for about a month to help them just kind of do all the things they had to do with applying for grants and loans and things through FEMA, because it was devastating.
Did it storm do a lot of damage to the stations?
Oh yeah, it was all of them were coastal properties. So we had stations in Nags Head, North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, Myrtle Beach, and Charleston. So every one of those markets were damaged, and so I helped them out through that. And but then I went back to the college town I went to, Greenville, North Carolina, and me and a couple of buddies bought a small station there. And that was my first opportunity to just run a station.
Oh, wait, I'm excited to know about this part. So the friend that you went to work with, that was United Communications?
It was actually Jones Eastern was the official name of the company.
Got it. And that gave you now the opportunity. You were CFO and handling oversight of all the finances.
Yep. Well, and CJ, the guy's name that I worked for, his name was CJ Jones. He's passed away now. But CJ gave me an opportunity to be more than just a CFO. He allowed me. It was the first chance I had to kind of be not a full COO, but a little bit of a COO. I got to be involved in operations a little bit with his company, and that was the part that was the most appealing to me. And it was. I learned a lot with those guys. So
was George upset when you left? Was that something that was tough to do, or he understood?
No, I don't think so. I think George is, George is one of those guys that's always, I think, happy for someone that gets to do something more with their life. I think he's supportive. We've remained friends. I don't see him often. The last time I saw him was at a mutual friend's funeral in North Carolina a couple years ago. I saw him there, and then I saw him in Atlanta at the NAB when he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award. I saw him then, so I don't get to see him very often, but when I do, it's always a pleasure, and it's always fun to be able to just reconnect with him. And he was definitely a big mentor, certainly early in your career, it sounds like. He was. I mean, I look back to those days with a lot of favor. I mean, I had a great time working for that company and working for him and learning from him. So after United, you now take even more guts. This, I think, takes more guts than even asking for twice your salary. You decide to get into ownership and actually buy a radio station. Yeah, so this was, you talk about an interesting situation. So it was a small station, 3,000 watt FM station in Greenville, North Carolina, small town. Big. It's a relatively decent sized market, coastal Carolina, right? Eastern North Carolina. It's a big geographical market. I think it's market 85 or something now. But there's only 2 or 3 signals in the market that cover the whole market. This particular signal only covered Greenville. This is where I wasn't smart enough to understand the dynamics of all of that, by the way. But a couple of friends and I got together and we bought the station. We paid $900,000 for this station. That's a sizable amount of money, especially back. It was a lot of money. Yeah. But we thought it all made sense, and it kind of did make sense. However, this was in 1991, and nobody, just like the situation we face right now today, nobody knew we were getting ready to go to war in Iraq. And what makes that significant for this particular radio station is in Eastern North Carolina, you have 5 military bases. And we go to war in Iraq after we've been in this station for about 6 months. And you could literally hear the sucking sound of the economy leaving with it. Jeez. Because all these people leave, and a lot of families go back to wherever they're from. They don't stay there. They just go home. And because keep in mind, a lot of military people, they're young people, they're young families. And so dad goes off to fight a war, mom and the kids go home to wherever they're from. And our economy you talk about a crashed economy. Second to this situation for sure, but it was bad. And I had never even thought about that. Your cume literally evaporated. Left town. That must be. It was really, really bad. And I'll tell you 2 quick stories though. Yeah, I'll tell you how this ended. So it was a disaster in terms of billing. It was a disaster. 2 things that saved me in that whole deal. One was computers were, again, we were still at a period where computers were just really exploding. And there was a guy in town that had a little local computer store. He sold HP computers, and he was sitting on a ton of HP computer co-op money. It was 100% co-op money. Okay. And he had no idea what it was. He didn't even know he had it. He didn't know what to do with it. And so we showed him what to do with it. And that money from that one client is what got us through. And that was probably the happiest day up until that point for me, getting that deal done. Probably the happiest day was I had a guy, this is a great story. I had a guy walk into my office one day, had never met him. His name was Steve Hardy. And Steve walks in my office and he said, I want to buy this radio station. And I said, well, how do you even know this radio station is for sale? And he said, you don't understand. He said, I was the DJ. I spun the first record ever on this frequency.
Oh, my gosh.
I want to buy the station. And I said, and I'm sitting there in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, dude, you have no idea how much I want to sell you this thing. And so we struck up a conversation and a friendship. And of course, long story short, he wanted to buy the station, but he didn't have the money to buy the station.
Okay.
And so, but I had another friend in town who was a doctor who had a lot of money and was a guy that liked to invest in things. Not necessarily run them himself, but invest in other people and other businesses. And I introduced the two of them, and they hit it off. And he ended up financing it so that Steve could buy it. And I ended up getting out of the station whole without losing everything I had. I mean by the skin of my teeth. It could have gone totally a different direction, if it hadn't have been for just pure fate of running into somebody that wanted it more than I did.
That's an incredible story. So what year did you sell it?
So we sold it we bought it in 89 and we sold it in 91.
Okay. So you had it for 2 years, and I'm sure you learned just a tremendous amount from that. I mean, your experience so far, learning, being mentored by George Beasley, and then going and working at United, where now you get some COO/CFO experience. And now you've got ownership. I mean, talking just about such a well-rounded background. That's unbelievable. What were the call letters of that station?
WRQR. WRQR. I always loved the call letters. I always thought they were great call letters. And I was 30 years old when I sold it.
Oh my gosh.
So I was young.
As a child, did your parents instill in you, I mean, they must have instilled some confidence and the idea that it was safe to go and take risks and chances?
Yeah. I mean, my dad was military. My dad was a career Air Force. And my mom was, she always worked. I mean, they both worked. My parents didn't have a lot. I mean, they worked hard for everything they had. They worked. They were workers. And, but they taught us, my sisters and I, we were taught to work. We were taught to work hard. And that, if there was something that you wanted, it was the right way to go about it was to work hard to go get it. And, not be afraid to go after things. So, I would say. It's
certainly, I'm very impressed in being an entrepreneur myself. I really love hearing these stories and going out on a limb like that and seeing, failing, because you've got to fail at times to learn, but also, overcoming those failures and using that background to turn it into success is, I think, really exhilarating.
Well, you learn your most. I mean, when you fail, you learn the most from failure. You learn far more from that than you do from success, I think.
I agree with that. I think you're 100% right. So you sell WRQR, and then how do you end up at Adams?
So I sell the station, and I have to do something, right? Got to find a job. And I saw an ad. This will take you back a little bit. Remember the old NAB Broadcasters magazine that used to come out?
Yeah.
So back then, people used to advertise jobs in it. And so I see a job posted for a CFO for Adams Radio Group, which I was not really familiar with. And I applied for it. I sent a resume. And I get a phone call from a fellow. His name was Jim C. Miller, and Jim was based out of Phoenix. He ran Cool FM in Phoenix, and Jim was running. There was two parts of Adams. There was Adams Radio Corporation, which was the stations that Jim was running, and then there was another part of the group called Adams Broadcast Group that Matt Mills ran, And so anyway, Matt Mills had been over the entire company, and then they had split it between the two of them. So Jim had taken over the bigger part of the company and was moving the corporate office from Tampa, Florida, where Matt was, to Phoenix. And so I flew out to Phoenix. I interviewed with Jim, hit it off with him. And the other guy that I hit it off with there that became a lifelong friend until he passed away in 2008 was Andrew Ashwood. I don't know if you ever met Andrew or not.
No.
DJ Hunter was his own air name, but he was a phenomenal on-air guy, just a great human being. Passed away in 2008 from pancreatic cancer. But
sorry to hear that.
But I hit it off with those guys and got offered the position, and I leave Greenville, leave my family, go out to Phoenix. I'm living there, in an apartment, and planning on selling my house in North Carolina and moving the family out. And then Jim was one of these guys that constantly kind of changed his mind about stuff, and so 6 months into it, my house is literally sold and they're loading a truck. Okay. And Jim says, we're going to move the corporate office to San Diego. So tell your wife she's moving to San Diego. The funny part of that story is my wife said, when I told her we were moving to Phoenix, she really didn't want to move that far away from her family, which was in North Carolina. And she said, all right, I'll move to Phoenix, but that's as far as I'm going. I'm not moving to California. And I don't even know why she even said that at that time, because that wasn't even a conversation.
It's one state over, apparently.
But then here I am on the phone call and then saying, guess what? We're moving to California. So I literally couldn't have moved her any further away from her family. Gosh. From coast to coast. But we moved to San Diego, and we were based out of KCBQ there. It was out in Santee, historical radio station. Just you'd get chills down your spine walking down the halls just because you just knew all the big radio people that had been in those studios before.
Hallowed ground. Crazy. So when were you in San Diego? So I
was in San Diego 91 through 93.
Oh my God. Okay. So we just missed each other. I moved to San Diego and started working at KFMB in 96. So I was in So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but our career paths almost intersected. So you're in San.
I loved San Diego. I loved work. I loved Phoenix too. I thought Phoenix was a great city. Loved being there at Cool. Cool was a great radio station. KCBQ was a great radio station at that time. Was a oldie station. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah. So Adams owned
KCBQ. That. Yeah, Adams at that time, that version of Adams was San Diego, Phoenix, San Antonio, Charlotte, North Carolina, Grand Rapids, Michigan, WLAB, Seattle, Denver, St. Louis. Adams had they were all big markets. And I got what happened for me though is having run that station in Greenville, I just had the bug of I really wanted to be running radio stations. I really didn't want to be a CFO. So I constantly just hounded Jim C. Miller about I want to be doing more in operations. And so we were having some problems in Charlotte. And so he said, you know what? Why don't you go out every other week, go spend every other week in Charlotte and oversee that station until we get somebody hired. And by the way, you find that person. And so I did that, which, by the way, didn't make my wife real happy that I brought her from North Carolina to San Diego, and now every other week I'm back in North Carolina. But we got through that whole process, and I hired a young gal. Her name was Jody Freitag, great GM out of Greenville, South Carolina, to take over Charlotte. And I really wanted to run a radio station. It's not just about being involved in operations. It's about being on the street. It's about meeting with clients. It's about coming up with ideas. It's about just being that person that looks at a market and says, I want to put my arms around this market. And I want to be the mayor of this town. I want to be the guy that no matter what's going on in this town, I'm the first person that they think about to call when they need help promoting it, or they need, extra people involved in it. They need a radio station to support it. I want to be that guy that they call, and you can't get that unless you're there all the time.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. I've never heard it quite put that way, but you're right. The mayor of this town being there to help the community and the businesses. It's a really good way to put that.
That's truly what it is. I think the best GMs that I've ever known, and I feel like this describes who I was as a GM, is the GMs that are truly involved in their community, right? You're not only are you in a Rotary Club, but you're on the board of that Rotary Club, and not only are you in that club, but you've got relationships with the people at the Lions Club and the Kiwanis Club, and you're going over and you're a guest speaker there, and you're talking about what's happening. And when you hear about some need in the community, you're the one out spreading the word about it, not just on the air, but personally, you're involved. So it's very satisfying. And so I stayed on Jim heavy about, I really wanted to run a radio station. And so finally he said to me in, it's like third quarter of 93, he said, go run St. Louis. Wow. St. Louis was the worst stations we had in the company. They had been a beautiful music station forever. Okay. Which that had died. Nobody was listening to it anymore. The cash flow on that station had fallen to, on a 12-month basis, had fallen down to about $250,000 a year. Oh my gosh! And continuing to fall. It was a bad situation. He said, "Go run St. Louis. You think you're so good at it? You want to run? Go run St. Louis." And so I moved to St. Louis and took over those stations. And the first thing I did, and me and this individual, we're still very good friends today. We still work together today. He consults with me in this company, Jim Richards, with Valley Consulting, Valley Richards. I met Jim right out of the gate, and Jim had been the PD at Y98, the biggest competitor, KZ. So the station I took over was KZK. Okay, sure. Y98 had been the biggest AC station in town, and KZK, many years prior, had been the number one station, but again, beautiful music wasn't a thing anymore. So I meet Jim and I said, so you're not working with them anymore. You're kind of a free agent. Do you want to work with me on this station? Do you want to help me build something here, something pretty special? And he said, yeah. And we started working together. And so we launched KZK as a soft AC station, rebranded it, new logo, the whole works. And believe it or not, in two books, we went from the worst rated FM in the market to the top rated FM in the market. And the only station that we weren't beating was KLOU, not KLOU, the big AM there. I don't know why I can't think of their call letters right now. KLOU was the oldie station. KMOX. Yeah, sure. KMOX was the big AM, the huge news talk station. That's the only station that we didn't beat. You were the number one music station in town. We were the number one music station in town, number one with females. Oh my God. I mean, nobody could touch us. It was the one time in my life that I had a situation where you could, if you wanted to reach females, you could not buy around me, period. Oh man, what a feeling that must have been. Oh, it was great. What did your boss say? Was he proud of you? He was pretty happy. Everybody's pretty happy. Our 12 months trailing cash flow grew from $250,000 when I got there to, when I left there, my trailing kept, I left there in I left there in September of 94. My trailing 12 months cash flow was $1.8 million. So this one FM. Geez, one Louise. FM. Yeah, that's almost like a 12, 13 time. It was crazy. Yeah, that's incredible. It was crazy. We couldn't get away from the money. Here's how good it was. I told my sales staff that the first month that we did $700,000, I would take them on a trip in the Caribbean somewhere for a week. We'd go on a nice fun party. It'd be a great time. And they hit that number in June of 94. And I scheduled the trip for the first week of July. We went into July already at $800,000. Unbelievable. I mean, we couldn't get out of the way of the money. It was crazy. It was a fun time. And I fell in love with St. Louis, loved that market. It was great. But so now this is a period of time when you're either, they're ramping up with consolidation. So you're either going to be a buyer or a seller. Right. You're either expanding or you're getting out at some pretty radical numbers. Sure. Because deregulation was 96, right? Yeah. Yeah. But it was all that was coming. I see. And so Steve made a decision that he was not going to expand in radio. Steve had the outdoor company, Adams Outdoor. He had the Good Sam Club, which now has rolled up into the camping world.
Yeah, sure. I remember that with the stickers on the back of RVs. Yeah, the Good Sam Club.
He's still part of it. It's just under Camping World now. But
okay.
Anyway, his focus went to other things, and so he's got out of business, and that's why I left St. Louis and went back to North Carolina. So now I've made my way all the way back home, practically.
Your wife's happy at this point.
Yeah, she was pretty happy about getting back there. So we go back to Raleigh. And so we were like 45 minutes from our hometown, which was, not bad. And I took over 2 stations there for Prism Radio. And one was a move-in from Burlington. It had kind of crappy coverage. And then the other one was a CHR that was licensed to Durham, G105. And so that was another, it was just, it was a, I don't know, right time, right place kind of thing. But we took the one that was moved in from Burlington and launched it as a classic rock station up against WRDU, which had been a monster, just unbelievable radio station in that market for 25 years, totally dominated the market. We launched a classic rock station. Well, I still to this day think it was the best sounding classic rock station I ever heard. And we put John Boy and Billy on in the mornings. Syndicated show going up against the local Reynolds and Silva, who had owned the market forever.
Yeah. That had been early on in John Boy and Billy's syndication.
Pretty early on.
Yeah.
Yep, we beat them. We not only beat them, but they left the format. They got out of the rock station. They got out of the rock business completely. Reynolds and Silva broke up, and RDU left the format. And we were, again, it was like a machine. We were printing money there. It was so crazy.
So both at KZK and then now again when you're at Prism, what would you say? I mean, different stations, because one was in AC, it sounded like, and the other was it was a rock station. But what did you do? What was the secret, do you think, to those turnarounds?
The secret was the people. It was the people. We built a really good staff in both cases. It was assembling the right people and having the right kind of chemistry in the building. Everybody wanted to win. Everybody was willing to go the distance to win. And I think for my part, I created an environment that constantly rewarded people for winning. And so when I look back on it now and I think about things that we used to do, aside from like the big trip that I took them on, we ended up doing a big trip like that in Raleigh too, which was fun. But in addition to that, if we hit our goals during a week, if we hit our goals by Thursday, I would come in on Friday morning and tell everybody, no matter what you got going on, cancel it. I've got a limo bus out front. We're all getting on the limo bus. We're going over to Afton to the Riverboat Casino, and we're going to go play all day. And by the way, here's a little bonus for you to play with. Thanks for doing such a great job. And we did a lot of that kind of stuff. We did a ton of that kind of stuff. Stuff
is so important. Mentor of mine, Michael Martin, had told me, and I remember when I was the program director here at K-Big, when we had a good book, and I was very just concerned. Instead of celebrating it, I was worried about, we're doing great now, but I was already worried about the next book. And he's like, You know what? You got to celebrate. You got to celebrate those moments. And this business as a whole, it's not like when you go and you win the Super Bowl, you celebrate and it becomes this big celebration. We tend to just move on and start thinking about the very next thing. And it's not that after you win the Super Bowl, it's not that the Redskins aren't thinking about the next, the Chiefs aren't thinking about the next season, but they still stop and they celebrate. And I 100% agree with you. We don't do enough of that as a whole, I think, in this business. Well,
that's part of the problem in our industry right now, I think, is that we just don't do those kind of things anymore in our industry. We don't do a lot of client trips. Remember back in the day when if a client spent a certain amount of money with you in first quarter, or maybe it was a year package, but you'd take 20 or 30 clients on an unbelievable trip and they'd have a great time and they'd come back and they'd sign up for the next year. I mean, we have gotten so conscious about cost that we view everything from that lens. versus looking at a lot of that stuff as an investment to get people to really fall in love with our radio stations. And that to me that's the saddest part of our business right now, I think, is that there was a time, and I don't think we could get this back. I don't think social media and all the other things that are out there, I don't believe we're to a point where we've lost all this. But we've got to aggressively grow this back if we want to hold on to it, where people really do fall in love with a radio station, right? Why do they fall in love with it? They fall in love with it because, one, it's fun. They love the music. But most importantly, they fall in love with it because there's somebody on the air that they connect to. And that person, they identify with them. They love them. They want to get up every day and listen to them. Or maybe it's the afternoon drive show and they're listening to that, whatever it might be. And we're stripping our industry down so quickly and getting rid of that and turning it into, there's so much syndication now on so many radio stations that those individual people that have the ability to really shine and create that kind of a relationship in their community, those opportunities are getting fewer and fewer and fewer. And my biggest fear is coming out of this crisis is that it's going to be even more so that way. There's going to be a lot of companies that are going to say, yeah, I got to set up an operations center somewhere. I'm going to have all my programming come from here, and maybe I'll have a local news guy in that market, but I'm not going to have any on-air people there because I got to save the money. And I just think all you're doing with that kind of thinking is you're buying yourself time, but ultimately you're killing your industry.
I think it's some amazing advice, and I agree with you. I don't think it's too late, and where we shine best are in moments that we're going through right now. And it's the people that are on air, it's the people in your sales department, your production department, the whole entire building has to be firing on all cylinders, but you can really feel a successful radio station. And when you think about winning teams, sports teams, and I like to use those analogies quite a bit, but you think of the Dodgers in the 50s and Koufax and Jackie and Pee Wee Reese and Campy and all these players, they meant something to the fans. And yes, they won because they were a great team, but those characters, they transcended even how they played baseball on the field. And I think that's the same thing that we need to bring back. Winning teams have great players for sure, but they also have a lot of character. They have a lot of heart, and they don't always win. And that's, I think, incredible.
Look, I remember when I went to Phoenix, and the guy I mentioned to you earlier, Andrew Ashwood, BJ Hunter was his on-air name, but I can remember he would do a remote at a car dealer, and it'd be a lunchtime remote in the middle of the week. And I'd go out there while he was there doing the remote. There'd be 200 people there.
Amazing.
I mean, think about that. I mean, 200 people in the middle of the day shows up at a car dealership to see him. They probably weren't there to buy a car. Sure. Maybe somebody snagged one of them or two of them and sold them a car, but they weren't there to buy a car. They were there to see him live because they had the relationship over the air was so strong that they wanted to be there and be part of what he was doing. I tell you, it just, sometimes I think back to some of that. It's sad. It saddens me to think that we might be losing that aspect of it. I remember back in 1985, I went to Wichita, Kansas to help a station there. It was called Long Pride Broadcasting. Charley Pride was one of the owners, and they were putting in a traffic system. It was a traffic system that I knew pretty well, and so I went there to train them on how to use this traffic system. So I was there for about 3 days. My first morning, I get up, and I wake up to Dusty Springfield on an oldies AM radio station that came on my radio in the hotel room. And I'm listening to this great song, and all of a sudden this voice comes on, this announcer. His name was Rick Gannon. He's passed away as well. All my friends are leaving me.
Sorry for that.
But Rick Gannon comes on, and it's just this voice from heaven. And I was just like, oh my God, I could not wait to get to the station and hopefully be able to get there before he leaves so I can meet him. And it was just a thrill for me. Yeah. And I think that's how people see on-air talent. That's that we have that kind of connection. But our industry, if we're not careful, That's the one thing that separates us from all of the other audio out there. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose it for no other reason other than we're too conscious about the cost and not focused on the fact that it's an investment in the product and in our future.
Yeah. I think it's very well put and great advice. So back, and I want to finish up on the rest of your career, and then we're going to get into everything that's happening right now with the pandemic. So you're at Prism, you turn around the station, you're now number one in the market, doing phenomenal, and then you end up back at Adams, a new iteration of Adams. Is how that happened? So between Prism and Adams, I'll skip through some of that because it's there's 2 or 3 steps, but I ended up leaving there. I had a great time in Raleigh. It was the 2 stations I ran were doing amazing. I mean, so I'm clear, you're a general manager at this point, right?
Yeah.
You're a full operations. Got it.
Stations.
Okay.
Yep. And it was the stations were doing phenomenal, but the company had a culture that was different than anything I'd ever experienced. And without going into a lot of detail, because it'll sound negative, it was a culture that I disliked very much. And so I ended up leaving there in spite of the success we were having, and ended up coming to Minneapolis to run again another turnaround.
You're a smoke jumper, man. You just get into these situations where you're turning stations around.
The Minneapolis one was a little different because the company that owned it, Park Communications, had owned it forever, 30 years. They had never made a profit ever on the station, ever.
Oh my God.
And so Roy Park was one of these guys that he liked to own everything. And so he made a decision many years prior to that to move the tower over to Somerset, Wisconsin, so he could own the tower. But he lost signal in Minneapolis by doing that. He didn't have signal parity with all the other FMs. And so it was a secondary station. But he had passed away. And so a new group of people had bought all of Park Communications. And so when I came here, the job was, we want you to find a way to get the signal back into Minneapolis so that we have signal parity. The station's only worth about $6 million right now at that point. And we know that if we can get signal parity, we're going to have a station worth somewhere north of 20 million. So that's your task, right? It was more about that than it was format or anything.
Got it.
They were doing classic country, and I'm talking about classic country, like Hank Williams Sr.
Oh my God, okay.
And so I had to work a lot of magic to get all that done, but I was able to work a deal out with a guy that had a CP that was blocking us to move back. I got a deal worked out with him to solve that part of the problem. The tower farm here, which was a partnership by all the other stations that had signal parity, right? That probably didn't want us on that tower. Why would you want another station with signal parity? I had to figure out a way to deal with them. And so I sat down with all of those general managers at one time and I said, look, here's the deal. We all know what's happening. Consolidation's coming. It's going to come here too, right? We're a standalone FM station. One of you are going to end up owning us. And if one of you own us and we're not already on that tower, the rest of you are never going to let the one that does own it get on there. So right now, you don't know who's going to own it, right? It could be CBS, it could be Hubbard, it could have been ABC at the time. Any one of you could end up being the owner. You don't know who it's going to be. So the best thing you can all do is agree to let me buy into the partnership and let me get on it now so that we're already upgraded, so that when one of you do get it, it has some value. And so they agreed.
And so is this one sit down with all the GMs?
One sit down.
Oh my God. It's like straight out of The Godfather. I could kind of see this. Are you like in the back room of an Italian restaurant?
We were in a restaurant. I don't remember the restaurant, but it was awesome. But it was the truth. It was the truth. I mean,
it's cool.
That's just the way it was. And so anyway, we got all that done and we got moved over, and sure to form, we ended up selling the station we sold it for $26 million to Nationwide. And then Nationwide traded it with CBS. So it ended up being the CBS group here is who ultimately ended up getting it.
So you more than quadrupled by that move, the value of the radio station.
Yeah.
That's a shrewd move. So your accounting background, while you obviously prefer the operational side of the business, your accounting background and that finance side has certainly paid off in spades. Yeah.
No, it's helpful. The sad part of that deal was is that the company gave me 90 days. They said, if you want to buy the station, we'll give you 90 days to raise the money. We'll sell it to you for $20 million. And I said, okay. So I go out and I meet with some people in the market that had the money, and I could not make them understand what was happening in the industry. And they couldn't get their head around it. They were more, there's not $20 million worth of desk and supplies. And I said, It's not about that. It's not even about the revenue.
Right.
It's about buying it for $20 million. And a year from now, we'll double our money. And they just didn't get it.
My gosh.
But Nationwide bought it, ended up buying it for $26 million. And within a year, did a trade with CBS. That trade, when they did that trade, it was valued at $50 million.
Oh, my God.
So when
was that like 97? 98?
That was in 96.
96, okay.
When that happened, I took the old Inside Radio fax. I took that fax and I sent it over to the two different people
I had bankers.
Tried to get money from. And I said, this is what I was trying to explain to you. And one of them came back to me and said, I get it now. When you have another deal like that, I'm in. And I said, no, you still don't get it, because that's the only one of those deals that's ever going to exist in Minneapolis ever again. It's never going to happen again.
Oh, man. Well,
but I went, so from there, when that was sold, I got into some auxiliary radio stuff for a while. The traffic business with shadow broadcasting, and I was part of traffic.com when that started. And I stayed with that up until the point they went public. And then once they went public, I left that company, and you have to wait out a certain period of time before you can sell.
So you owned part of that company.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did actually then at some point had a nice liquidity event, it sounds like, even though you missed out.
Yeah. I mean, it's been some fun along the way.
Yeah.
And it was a small piece. It wasn't huge. So, but I got out of that and then went back to radio. And so, but in 2013, so we'll talk about Adams again. So
yeah, in
2013, I reached out to Steve, who I had not talked to in 20 years.
Really quick, so you left those. So for about 12 years, you were doing traffic. Is that correct? Or
from 96 until 2004.
Okay. So you're in the traffic side of the business, and that's a really interesting side. If you don't mind, because that is a very fascinating side of the business to me. Let's talk about it for a second. I loved it. Yeah.
I loved it. You know what? Here's what I loved about it. So I took over. I met this fellow. His name was Al McGowan. Al was the president of Shadow Broadcasting. Nicest guy in the world. And I ran into him. I actually ran into him 2 or 3 times and just ended up striking up conversations with him. And the last time I run into him, I was in Philadelphia, which is where his office was. And he said, why don't you come over and see our operation? He said, I really need somebody to run Detroit for me to open it. We're going to launch Detroit. I need somebody that knows what they're doing to do that. And he said, I'm telling you, we're not that different from radio. Why don't you come and see our studios? And so I go over and walk in, and it's like, shoot. I mean, it literally was just like being in a radio station. You had all these on-air people running around doing these reports for all these stations, and the fun and the energy was there. And so anyway, I ended up going to work with him, and he became a very good friend, and we launched Detroit. And so I go into Detroit, and this is the part about the business that I loved, is that radio stations were giving away, they would give away 10-second sponsorships, right? They go sell somebody something, and then they'd bonus them a whole bunch of shit. Nobody saw any value in 10-second sponsorships. And well, that's what we were getting for our news product and our traffic product and sports. We would create whatever you wanted, short form product, in exchange for the 10-second sponsorship. And then we were going out and selling them to clients. In Detroit, we ended up generating about $14 million a year in Detroit on inventory that radio stations were literally giving away.
It's amazing.
They saw no value in it. Now, that's not so much in today's world, people see more value in it now, right? They learned their lesson. But it blew my mind.
And providing a phenomenal service to the radio stations. And
it was a great service.
A lot of times it's a really high testing service.
Al McGowan, Al left Shadow and was one of the founders of Traffic.com.
Oh,
and
wow.
so he invited me to come along with him on that ride and hired me to be the VP of affiliate sales for the country and run ad sales for the Midwest. And so I go to work for Al there, and it was a phenomenal time. I mean, I signed the largest deal personally that they had. It was $100 million of inventory.
Holy moly.
That we ended up with. It was a three-year long deal with Emmis.
Great
we
company.
Were, by the time the company went public, we were on an annual basis, we were selling about $50 million a year in sponsorships.
That's amazing.
And so it was a great business. And Al, I look at some of the people I've worked for over the years that I really respect a lot, and that they taught me a lot. And George was one of those people. Al McGowan was one of those people that I learned a great deal from. And so, I think when you kind of put your life experiences kind of all together, it's nice to be able to point out those people that had so much impact on your life.
And your career is, the more we talk, the more rounded, to have this traffic / somewhat network experience of Shadow, GM, CFO, auditing and auditing, sales. I mean, you've really done so many different things throughout the industry. It's very impressive.
Well, look, even today with our company today, about 3-4 years ago, I said to all of our programming and our managers, because most FMs, they don't do a lot of news. If they do any at all, they don't do much. And I said about 3 or 4 years ago, I had a big meeting with them all, and I said, guys, we're going to start doing news on our FMs. I know you don't agree with me. I know you think it's, the listeners aren't going to listen to it, that we shouldn't stop the music for news. I get it. I've heard it all before. I understand your position on it, but we're going to do it. And I don't think it's going to hurt us. I think it's going to help us. And we're gonna at least try it. And so we did. And we have for the last several years, we have had a news product on all of our stations. We even brand it. In Maryland, it's the Delmarva News Network. In Tallahassee, it's the Tallahassee News Network. And so on.
I think that is so incredibly smart. In much of Europe, the government requires that music stations break down for news. And I think it actually makes for a more informed public. I think that it gets a younger generation, especially with the younger formatted stations, into news, and they become more knowledgeable. How's that going ratings wise?
It's gone great. It's gone great. It never hurt us anywhere. The stations that you would expect to have, the best ratings in the market, like for instance in Maryland, WZBH, The Beach, alternative rock station, was one of the stations that I got the most pushback on.
Sure.
The people that listen to that, they for sure don't want to hear news. It's like, no, I don't buy it. That station continued to be number one, never hurt our ratings at all. But I bring it into today's world. And while everybody else was scrambling to try to figure out how they're going to cover news, now that we have a crisis on our hands, right? How they can locally cover that, we just kept doing what we were doing.
I think it's a brilliant move, and something that's so important to people, especially now, is having trust with your brands. People have to trust, and especially in a world where you have no idea, especially when you're looking at social media and where these stories are coming from. Are they legitimate news stories? Are they not? And to have a trustworthy station and brand give you news, I think has a tremendous amount of a positive impact in the community.
And we've seen the reports from Nielsen that, I just saw one last week that showed how radio is still the most trusted source for news. People don't trust. I don't know of anybody that truly trusts television news anymore, because it's all become basically somebody's opinion. They just get on there and obliviate ad nauseum. And it's just, it's to a point now where, unless you just want to hear somebody's opinion about it, you tune it out. You don't want to hear it. And where on radio news, it's still presented in a very factual way. Here's what's happening. You can decide whether you like it or don't like it, or agree with it or don't agree with it. But nobody on radio that I know of is trying to, in normal news. I'm not talking about a Rush Limbaugh show. I'm talking about in normal news.
Straight up news station or newscast.
They're just telling you what's going on. And so the trust factor is through the roof right now on radio news. And I think that's the reason why, is because we've become the Walter Cronkite that people can trust.
It's a very smart move. So how do you get back to Adams after doing Shadow?
Yeah, so I reached out to Steve in 2013 and just said, look, I would love to have a conversation with you about starting a new radio group if you're interested in getting back in the business. I think that there's an opportunity different than what you did before. This one would be more focused on smaller markets 50 through 200, markets that are small enough that a GM can get their arms around, like I was talking about earlier, where you really could own that market. And I think there's an opportunity, and the multiples are right. The multiples since we've been in the business they've averaged around 6.5 times. Hopefully they'll still be worth that as we come out of this crisis. Who knows? But that was, I thought that was a bargain price, for stations. And so we basically, I sent Steve a letter and said, what do you think? And I get a call back like a week later, and picked up the phone, and we picked up right where we left off 20 years earlier. And
oh my gosh.
He said, can you come out to my office tomorrow? And I said, if I can get a flight, I can.
He's still
in
San Diego?
I went to his office the next day, and we put a deal together, and a month later we launched the company, and 6 months later we bought Las Cruces, and then, fast forward October of 2017, we bought the fifth market, which was Tallahassee. And, but we tried to put some specific parameters in place on how we were trying to do this. And, one of the things that we were really trying to stick to was we wanted to buy stations that there was limited competition in the market. So not one that's over radioed, that they own their real estate, they own their space, that they own their towers, so you're not loaded up with a lot of rent. All of those factors, we try to find markets that all of those factors existed in, and we were fortunate to be able to find that. And it's we got some pretty good deals with some of the stuff we did. And we looked at, you can't even imagine how many different markets we've looked at over time. The things that we thought were overpriced and we walked away from. In some cases, we saw other people pay a price that we thought was too heavy, and I think what we saw up front has turned out to be the case. And then there's been some things that we looked at that, quite frankly, I'm looking back on it now thinking I'm glad it didn't happen. I mean, we were involved a couple of years ago. We had an exclusive opportunity on a deal that would have catapulted us from where we are now, which I don't even know where that is on the list, the hierarchy, but it would have made us, in terms of number of stations, it would have made us the 15th largest company.
Oh my gosh, so big deal.
Which is that's still small. I mean, if you think 15 is still small, but it was a deal that would have brought us into 8 markets with very, very legendary stations. Was a great opportunity. We spent 6 months working on this deal before anybody else had a chance to even look at it. And we made an offer on it. We were trying to get it done. We ran into an impasse with the seller. Quite frankly, I think the seller, a year later, I think the seller wishes they had made a different decision at the time, because they ended up making less money on the stations and it took them a year to get it done.
Oh, wow.
But it fell apart at the last minute. And at the time I was just like, I just couldn't believe it, because my heart was set on it. That whole company had all the parameters that we had set out. It was perfect for us. Didn't happen. And now, though, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, boy, I think I'm pretty happy that didn't happen now, because faced with what we're faced with today, if we had that company, if that had happened, we would be a totally different company. And some of the things that are going to be available to us through the legislation that was passed, that we're going to be able to tap into, we would not have been able to have tapped into because we would have been too large.
Too many employees, and that's interesting.
So you always have to walk away from everything with a state of mind that things happen for a reason, and just walk away knowing that. And you might not understand it at that moment, but somewhere down the line, you'll look back on it and you'll be thankful that it happened the way it did.
Would you say, before we get into now the pandemic, which is where I want to go next, but I have one more question before then, are you having the time of your life in regards to being able to run this group? It kind of sounds to me that this is like the perfect crescendo of all these things that you've studied throughout your career to become now the CEO and president of a large group.
Yeah, I mean, I love what I'm doing. I've got a great team. I've got a wonderful controller that, has my back on the financial side. I've got great GMs. I am really happy with where I'm at and what I'm doing. I love being back in business with Steve Adams. He's one of the greatest people that I've ever known. He's one of the most, I don't know how you describe him really. He's just a very gentle soul. If you met him on the street, you would just think he was the guy down the street, maybe that owned the coffee shop. He's a super nice guy. And he loves to see people succeed. He loves the idea of people getting in business and being successful. He just loves watching it. And so, yeah, I'm very happy. I mean, that said, I'm obviously a little bit concerned right now with what's going on in the world. I mean, this is going to change all of our lives, and it's going to change most companies. The way they were operating before will not be the way they operate in the future. And I mean all industries, not just radio. But I think radio for sure it's going to be a different game going forward for most radio companies. I'm a little nervous about that. You
were the first company, at least that I read, to really get ahead of the curve and announce the salary reductions. And I honestly, just a day or two after you announced it, we did the same thing here, almost identical. We've asked our team, just full transparency, to take 15% salary reductions. And then myself and my partners have taken 30% salary reductions to help with what we're seeing right now, at least over the next 10 weeks, being substantially off of our revenue.
Yep. So look, there's nothing more important, in my opinion, than your people. And the last thing anybody should want is to come out of this crisis and not have their staff still in place and ready to hit the ground running to not only help you rebuild your company, but be out there doing what we do in helping our communities rebuild from this, right? You want to have your staff ready to go to make a decision, and this is just my opinion, everybody has to do their own thing, but to make a decision to furlough people, I'm in disagreement with that decision. I think it's a wrong decision long term. So for us, it was about how can we obviously knew, look, we're taking cancellations like everybody else. It's been brutal. We've written very little business in the last 3 weeks. And we've taken a lot of cancellations. Our business looks very different today than it did 3 weeks ago, our projections. So we had to quickly look at it and say, what can we do to try to minimize the impact of this so that we can weather this storm by reducing compensation across. And I had a conference call with our entire company. I've never done that before. That's the first time I'd ever had a call with every employee on the line at one time. And I laid it out for them, and I said, I need everybody on board with this. I hope everybody will understand what I'm trying to do. And we'll share in this burden together so that no one person has to share in it alone and be out there on their own. And everybody was supportive. I got a bunch of emails from people after that call saying, thank you so much for doing this the way you're doing it. The second part of that was putting our 401k on hold, our match. And individuals can still contribute, but we stopped the match, and we had a decent match. I mean, we did 50% of 6% of your pay. It was a decent match.
That is a good match.
We put that on hold, but all of these things are done temporarily until we get through this. I hope that we'll be able to put our 401k back in place by January, and we're keeping up with the amount of money that people are. I actually, the way I'm referring to it is the money that people are contributing to help us weather this storm. So that 10% cut that everybody has taken, we're keeping up with it, and I'm hopeful that at some point in the future, and I don't know when that'll be, and I don't know if it'll be, let me put it that way, but I'm hopeful that at some point we'll be able to bonus our employees back that money, and that one day that they'll get it back. It won't be a forever loss. That's my goal. If we can return our company to where it was and get our profits moving back in the direction that they were, I think in time, we can reward our employees for being part of the solution and weathering the storm with us.
I have so much admiration for what you're doing, and we copied pretty closely to what you're doing, and I largely agree. This is something that we're trying to avoid furloughs here, and I had a very similar conversation with the team, and I was actually shocked by it because it was such a tough conversation to have and to tell them what we were doing. But I also received quite a few notes that really just put a smile on my face from employees that were grateful for us doing it that way. And unfortunately, it's just so difficult to project what's going to happen going forward.
Right.
But if you look, we just came off of our best January and our best February. We had a really strong 2019. And for this, as we were talking before we got on today together, this is just this black swan event that no one could have predicted. It's only been a little over 90 days since the virus has even been around, at least in humans. And it has brought the entire world practically to its knees. It is an unbelievable event, and unlike anything I've ever had to go through. And I think what you're doing, honestly, it just gives me goosebumps because I find it such great leadership. What is right now kind of keeping you up at night? And let me go into a little bit more specifics. It sounds like, again, you're doing just everything you possibly can to protect your employees and continue this culture that I know is incredibly important to you. What worries you right now, and what do you see as this kind of develops? When do you think that things will start to come back?
Well, I think, the thing that keeps me up, honestly, more than anything is that my mind keeps spinning in terms of, are we doing everything that we could be doing? For example, this morning I sent out several emails to all of our markets about things just ideas that I thought we should at least consider. One of them was get on the phone with every single client. And this was for the GMs. I said, I want you guys to call every single client and let them know that when they're ready to come back on, that we know that they're going to have cash flow problems just like we are and just like everybody else is. And because of that we are going to relax our collection policy. We have always had a very tight collection policy. I think the best of any company I've ever been with has been here on how we've collected money. But I told the GMs, let your clients know that we know that they're going to need to kickstart their company. And if that means that we've got to give them 90 days of credit on receivables to help them get their message out there early, then let's do that. It's worth doing that. Smart. If we don't save them, we can't save ourselves. So it's things like that. I suggested to each of our market, we've got some unique assets in each of our market in terms of community assets. And like, for example, in Tallahassee, Florida, the Capitol building, I don't know if you've ever been to Tallahassee or not. The Capitol building, there's only one building in Tallahassee that's a really, really tall building. It's the tallest building in town. In fact, there's a law that nobody can build taller than that building. Okay. And but it's a beautiful building. And I sent Jason a note and I said, it'd be great if you could work with the city government and maybe we could turn that building, light it up at night, red, white, and blue, as a sign of hope that we are going to get through this together, and you could live stream it so that anybody that can't drive by and see it could at least see it online. Little things like that. My mind kind of never stops spinning about stuff like that. And so that definitely, I'll wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and I have to get up and I have to go send it to somebody. So the part that worries me is I don't know how, nobody knows how long this is going to go. I think if we come out of this by the end of April and we can get back to business, the country get back to business, while it's still going to be painful for us all for a while, we're going to get through it. Things will start coming back. If this stretches out to the end of May, while that's only, you could say, well, that's only another 4 weeks. I think if it goes to the end of May, I really think all bets are off as to who survives it and who doesn't, because there's going to be a lot of small businesses that simply will never reopen if it goes out that far. And I know that every life is precious. I get it. But at some point in the future, we are going to look back on this and we're going to measure all of this with hindsight. Yeah. And it may be that we look at this and say what we did, cost thousands of jobs, millions of jobs. It cost thousands of businesses, their companies. Economically, it was the worst situation we've ever faced. But it was worth it because, we saved 2 million lives. But there's also the possibility that we'll look back on it and say, maybe we overstepped this a little bit. Maybe there was a little more hype to this than what needed to be, because I don't think anybody really knows where this is going to end yet. And these extreme measures that we've taken, this disruption of 350 million people, just in our country, we've disrupted the lives of 350 million people in an effort to save, what you could maybe make the argument isn't going to be as bad as what we're sometimes being led to believe it is. And I'm saying that as a layman. I don't know what it's going to be. Yeah. Nobody knows. But
I read an interesting article to your point in the BBC. It was an op-ed, but and again, I'm a layman as well. My father's a physician, so I talk to him nightly and get his insight on it. But this op-ed piece in the BBC, and please, take it for a grain of salt, but is saying that a lot of the people that are dying have underlying conditions, and they're being reported as dying of coronavirus, but that's probably not actually what they died of. And They had a cancer, kidney issues, whatever it may be. And there's no doubt we still know very little about this, but this argument also goes on that we may be causing more deaths by damaging the economy as much as we possibly are, because there's a lot of people that are supposed to go in for regular surgeries right now that cannot, that are getting pushed back. There are also a lot of people that may not even actually have food on their table, and so you're going to have malnutrition issues, and you're going to have it's a very interesting piece. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it is certainly a different argument. And
no, but it does provide for interesting thought. And I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who has lost a family member to coronavirus. And he said, but Ron, he goes, she was 92. Right. We were going to lose her if she'd have got the flu, if she'd have got pneumonia, if she'd have fallen, if she had just taken a fall, she would have killed her. Yeah. And he said, we need to keep some of this in perspective. I'm the first one to step back and go, there's probably an awful lot of stuff about all of this that we don't even know, that they don't even tell us. And so, yeah. Who knows? But it does. When I think about the lives of my employees, and then you multiply that times all the people in the country, it is enough to keep you awake at night, because I think there is a balance here somewhere as to whether or not we are causing more harm than we are good by basically shutting everything down. I don't. If I had the answer as to where that is, I don't know. Here's the other thing I would tell you too, and I thought about this a lot. I'm a fan of history. I'm a World War II history buff, and when we needed to end that war in Japan, Roosevelt put together about 30 scientists of the best, and he said, create an atom bomb. You got 18 months to do it, right? 18 months to create an atom bomb, something that had never been done ever. They had no clue where to even start. But yet they did it. And in this situation, it's like, well, this is a virus. I mean, we've dealt with viruses before. This is just a different virus. It would seem like you could put together your best of your best, and that maybe they could come up with something that could be very quickly produced, and we could all be vaccinated for it. I just don't. Some of it I just don't understand enough of, to understand why this has to drag out. When I hear them say we're going to have a vaccine in 18 months, it's like, well, gosh, in 18 months, if we go, we're not going to be able to go through this again. If this virus raises its head again next winter, you can't shut the economy down again next year.
I would agree. We need a Manhattan Project, a moonshot to, a collective effort amongst the pharmaceutical companies and research companies, something to address this. And I 100% agree. I think the pressure, and I do not want to minimize people that are going through this, or your friend who lost his mother, and obviously it's a horrific thing and people are dying, which I hate to see, but it is crushing, it's crushing capitalism, and it's crushing our businesses. And I'm leaving every day with, just pressure on my chest like I've never felt before, because the responsibility, and I think you and I both have that same feeling towards our teams, and we wouldn't be where we are if it weren't for all the hard work and dedication that they put in. And it's so incredibly tough to navigate through this, and that's why your insight I find so incredibly important and valuable, not only for myself.
Well, I think when you say that really well when you talk about the pressure on your chest. I mean, I think that for some people, it's not just saying, hey, I've got a lot of pressure. It's like they really do feel it. I mean, I think there are people that there's so much pressure on them right now for the fear of what's going to happen afterwards, what's going to happen to my business, what's going to happen to my employees, how are they going to survive? And I think, you're going to see, I heard it on the news this morning. I was listening to one of the news channels this morning. They were talking about, what we haven't seen from this yet is the statistics of the number of people that are, domestic violence in the home, where they're losing control of their own actions, suicides, issues with alcohol and drugs that are going to skyrocket because of this, because everybody's going to start trying to figure out some way to try to deal with this and damper it some. And we don't know what all that is going to cost us yet. And I think that's really my biggest point is that, it may be that the cost to humanity may be larger because of what we're doing than it would have been if we'd have just let this play out like any other virus. Because I just, part of it, I can't get my head around, we've never reacted this way to any other virus. And I just can't get my head around why this one is so uniquely different.
I was at Disneyland with my cousin just a little over a month ago, and had a great time. And we knew this was around, but it was nothing like what it is today. And I was just thinking this morning, because Disney just announced that they're laying off or furloughing 229,000 employees at all of their parks.
I saw that.
And, those people were all working and, helping us eat and go on rides and get into the park. And now they're all out of work.
It is. Were you at CRS?
I was.
Yeah. And so I was at CRS too. And I think about that sometimes too. It's like how many had to have been 4, 5, 6,000 people. I don't know how many people were there. A lot of people. And that was right in February.
Yeah. Middle of February. Yeah, this has happened so quickly. And from a business standpoint, I think, probably the closest to this was the Great Depression. But even then, I've been using the analogy of a garden hose. And if you're outside and you're watering your plants and your hose is turned all the way on, a recession or even a depression, it's like, the hose has been turned off 25%, or there's certainly not as much water coming out, but there's still water coming out. We're fortunate in our business, there's still a little bit of water coming out, but in some businesses, there's no water at all. I mean, it's just completely, we're located in a mall. We're in an office tower that's attached to a mall, and this mall's been closed now, I think, in its third full week, and no one is allowed in. It is just a complete ghost town, and all of these stores and restaurants in the food court, and I don't know how.
Well, and that's it's kind of how I see, with my business right now. When I look at my numbers, 3 weeks ago, we were pacing. We weren't killing it against last year, but we were pacing basically 100% of last year. We were right on track, essentially doing the same thing we were going to do that we did last year. We're now down to 75% of last year, so I'm down 25%, and this has only been, essentially it's been a month since we shut down everything, and We'll pull out of that. I do think if this happens quickly, we'll if we get back to work quickly, we'll pull out of that. Everything will be fine. But it's a moving target. Every single day, I have my people are reporting. They report it directly to me. Any cancellations that come in, and so we're keeping up with it. And every single day it changes. And so literally every single day. You can recharge your numbers and reproject what as best you can the rest of the year. But this is the most difficult thing. I don't care how skilled you are in numbers. Nobody can predict where their business is going to be this year, which is that affects everybody, not just the business owner. But if you own stock in that company, it's going to affect the stock price. If it's in your 401k, it's going to affect your 401k. That we've not felt what we have felt so far, I don't believe is even a drop in the bucket to what we're going to feel before it's over with. Now, I do think it'll come back. I don't think this is not a situation where you go, oh my God, my 401k is down 50%. I better sell it and take cash. That to me is a horrible mistake. Don't make that mistake, because once you do that, you have lost it.
Yeah.
Stay the course. Those companies will come back. Most companies, most of the companies that you would invest in are going to come back. But the small mom and pops, that donut shop down the street or coffee shop or that small
hair salon,
used car lot, I mean, a lot of those people will not ever reopen their businesses. And those are the ones that I feel for them.
Me too. What advice do you have in regards to let me actually rephrase this. What are you doing right now for your own personal well-being to help alleviate the stress?
Yeah. So, obviously it's 3 weeks now working at home. I said to my wife the other day, I said, can you think of one positive thing that has come out of any of this? And she looked at me without even batting an eye. She said, yeah, we've spent more time together in the last 3 weeks than we have in the last 3 years. So there is some positive to come out of it. For me personally, I'm working down here in my basement, and I have a Springer Spaniel, and so she spends a good deal of time down here at my feet, and that's kind of nice. Yeah. And, sometimes you look down and you forget about all the other stuff. Dogs have a way of doing that for you.
Sure.
I try to go for a walk with her, every day and get out of here and just get away from it all. I will tell you though, I'm getting up earlier now than I've ever gotten up. I mean, I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep. And so I'm up and I can tell you that by the time I get to about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the old fashions have never tasted better. So I try at the end of every day, I try to end my work day out on my front porch. I just go out on the front porch and sit. But I will also say that I'm seeing the same people walking up and down the street, usually at about the same times. And I'm beginning to think that they're probably looking at me every day going, man, that guy's got a problem. He's out here every day doing that. Well, but you got to find a way you got to get away from it a little bit. It can't be 100% on your mind all the time, or it'll drive you crazy.
What, any books that you recommend, leadership books or podcasts that you listen to for inspiration or guidance?
Well, I'll tell you, if I flip this camera around, I could show you a bookcase full of books. I think any book on leadership is worth reading, honestly. I enjoy reading books on leadership. I'll read anybody's book. Everybody's got something to share. But I also enjoy books on history and on war, because I think you learn a lot from just the decisions that people have to make in really tough times.
Being a World War II buff, and I'll leave with this question, but I also am very fascinated by World War II. I'm Jewish, and my grandfather lost his first wife and daughter in the Holocaust, and I've always had a great deal of admiration for Churchill and how he stood up against Hitler and the Nazis and took such a stand. What do you think Churchill would do in this situation?
In this situation? Man, I'll be honest with you. And I'm not saying this, I'm not leaning into anything political here. I'm just giving you my opinion. I think that the person in our country, I think that Trump is doing an amazing job. I think Churchill would be proud of the job that is being done. The leadership that I've seen from him, take away all the other stuff, the peripheral stuff, right? The goofy stuff he says on Twitter, whatever, all that kind of, none of that matters right now to me. The only thing that matters is, are the right decisions being made? Are we putting the trust in the right people? And when I watch him at those news conferences, and when the other people, when he has the doctor talking or the Surgeon General talking, if you watch Trump while those people are talking, I've never seen a president listen so intently to what they're saying as what he does. And so I think we have the right leadership at the right time for this crisis. I really believe that. Would Churchill have done a better job? I don't know. I mean, this is something the world's never faced. And of course, you can make the argument the world never faced what he faced then either, certainly with what happened to the Jewish population. I mean, that was, the whole world ignored that was going on.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to acknowledge it, even though they knew it. It wasn't a secret. People knew it. Most countries chose to ignore it.
Right.
But, in times of crisis, the right people always step up. I think about that too. And President Truman at the time, Truman was the first guy to recognize Israel.
Yeah, that's right.
He was the first world leader to recognize Israel as a country, as an independent country. And so you always have the right people in the right places, I think, at the right time. So we'll look back on this, I think, and we'll agree on that too. But these are, you and I'll tell you, you and I may have, prior to this starting a month ago, we would have both probably agreed that our lives have been fairly easy, that we haven't really had too many crises to have to worry about, right? 9/11 was bad, but it was so compacted where it happened.
Right.
We probably would agree that we lived our whole life without having to do any kind of real sacrifice. And now when this is over with, we'll be telling our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren about what we went through in the crisis of 2020. There's no doubt this is the most adverse the most horrible thing I've ever faced as a business leader, as honestly a human being. It's It's you know what I said to my GMs the other day on a call. We were talking about this, and I can see that they're all worried. They're all worried every time I get on a call with them, and we're meeting twice a week now with Zoom, so we can see each other. And I know what's on their mind. Every time we have a call, they are waiting for another shoe to drop. They're waiting for me to say, we haven't done enough, we're going to have to do more, whatever. But I said to them the other day, look, guys, this is hard. There's no question this is hard. This is hard on everybody. But we can take a little bit of solace in this. Our forefathers, mothers and fathers that were in this country and survived the revolution, the people that fought with George Washington at Bunker Hill and didn't have boots or coats or tents, they had no food, and they still stayed the course to accomplish what they had to accomplish. We're not having to do that. We're not having to fight our own brothers like we did in the Civil War. We're not having to kill our own family, and we're not living in foxholes in Germany, in the middle of winter without proper gear, without enough ammunition, and fighting an enemy that had seemingly no end to reserves to keep coming at them. So I try to put it in that perspective that we're giving up a lot right now. And I think there's going to be a lot of suffering when this is all said and done. We're going to look and go, man, our generation really, this was a hard hit, but there's plenty of other generations before us that gave a lot more. It was a lot harder what they went through. And I think you have to just keep reminding yourself that. I don't know how else you get through it.
That is so well put. And we will leave it at there. Ron, so much respect for you and admiration. Everything that you've done at Adams and throughout your career is just remarkable, and I've really enjoyed hearing the story and in getting this advice and counsel from you. Want to special thanks to Michael Kay from Vipology, along with Chris Beasley and Tom Pincus and Brian Parsons, our partners at Vipology, made this interview with Ron possible.
They're all great guys.
Really good guys. So thank you to them. Thank you to Kevin Horton for producing and engineering the show. And Ron, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Dave. This has been great. Thank you very much.
And I hope you be well as well. And my best wishes to your 3 grandkids. I'm sorry, your 3 kids and 5 grandchildren and your wife Kim. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.